Hey there, teammates. I really wanted to show you this. This is pretty cool stuff that I've been putting together in Zapier. And it's funny, I always forget, like I'm so used to these longer, big Zapier, workflows that sometimes a simple five-stepper like this can be really powerful. So take a look at this. First thing I do is check when an email comes in. It has to come into my inbox and it has to be marked as important. Those are the conditions. When that happens, Zapier grabs it, brings it down, and I do classified text in ChatGPT, which I'll show you all about in a moment. Then I analyze the sentiment using ChatGPT, and only continue if is a condition, a filter that says only do the next step if the result of the sentiment is negative. And if it's negative, I create a task in Google Tasks. So this five-stepper is creating a task for an important negative email. All right, so let's take a look at it in a little more depth. If I go in and edit this Zap, just show you very quickly what this does in the trigger. You can specify how you want to search for things. So what I'm doing here is going into Gmail as the integration, and it has a lot of different things you can do with Gmail, but this one is a new email matching a search. So again, I'm not going to go into all of the depth of what Zapier can do, but that's basically what it's doing here. The trigger is if it's in the inbox and it's marked as important. So you could do all kinds of things on this. You could do, like I said, you can search on particular folders or particular words sent from somebody, whatever the case might be. For me, it's all important emails that go to my inbox. The next thing we do is classify the text using ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is one of two different integrations that Zapier has for the OpenAI side of things. Just want to talk about the ChatGPT one for a second. Remember that OpenAI is the company that creates ChatGPT, and that ChatGPT is just an app. Okay, it's just a website you go to, you're using this app, and it is the conversational interface with all of the GPT models behind the scenes, the plugins, the DALL-E image generation, all that kind of stuff. ChatGPT, this integration, is as if you're going to the ChatGPT website. So it has that kind of functionality. And one of the things that it has is classified text. I'll go into more detail on that, what other options there are in a moment. In this, I said I would like to classify the subject and the body, the plain text. There's HTML as well you could grab. But I want to grab from step one the subject and the body of the message. Simple enough. I gave some categories, very standard kind of generic categories. It's like it can be about family, friends. My honey-do list, sometimes I'll have, get messages from my wife. Don't forget to do this in the bathroom, or don't forget to do, whatever we're talking about. So my list gets pretty long. And this classification of text can say, hey, if an important email comes into my inbox from my wife that says, don't forget you have to buy tiles for the bathroom, then that will actually run through this Zap for me. It's kind of cool. But anyway, I have different categories. I just threw some together. You can put whatever you want on this list. And then it uses GPT-3.5 Turbo. I could select a different model in here, such as GPT-4. But I'm going to stick with 3.5 Turbo. It has done a decent job for me in this type of thing. Now, again, let me just quickly, as an aside here, use 3.5 Turbo for most things. Especially if you're dealing with something small, like your results are small, they're not complex. You're classifying data, so that's small, and 3.5 is cheap in comparison to GPT-4. You don't need the power of GPT-4 for something like this kind of text classification. So use GPT-3.5 Turbo, and I'm just using the standard outputs. I did try changing the temperature. For those of you that aren't familiar, the temperature is sort of it says it here, the output's more random. It gives it more leeway to think of answers, but the higher you go, the more creative the answer can be, but that also means the more likely it could hallucinate. In this case, look, I want to look at this text and go with this discrete set of categories. So I'm just leaving it at the default of 1. I did try it down at 0.4 and 0.2, and I got mixed results. I liked what happened for my tests using 1.0, but definitely try it out yourself. If 1.0, which is what comes out of the box, doesn't work for you, try something else. That's the beauty of this. You can go down here and do testing and try these different variables and get it to work your way. So quickly going over the text classification, that's what that does. Now, sentiment is very similar. There's a whole event here called Analyze Text Sentiment. The action we're going to do is same thing against the subject and the body. I'm going to use 3.5 Turbo out of the box. Again, same idea. It's just giving me a sentiment. Sentiment just comes down to, is it positive, is it negative, or is it neutral? That's it. Those are the three results you get. You can use 4, but again, keep in mind that to even use any of the GPT-4 things behind the scenes, you need to have a ChatGPT Plus account over on OpenAI stuff. Just taking this right out of the box works great. So I get a sentiment. So when the email comes in, it's marked as important. AI is looking at it and telling me, what kind of classification is it? Is it business? Is it groceries? Is it something about a friend or a family member? And then is it positive, negative, or neutral? Based on what AI is determining for that, we can then use that information further down the line. This says only continue if the sentiment is exactly negative. So if the sentiment is negative, we're going to continue on. If it's positive or neutral, we're going to drop out because we don't need to address those. If you're doing things well, you've batched your time. I hope you're doing that. Batch up your time set for a half an hour every evening. I do it 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and there's a slot in the evening, slides around depending on the day. But basically, that's my time to go in and look at emails, reply to emails, and things like that. So the neutral ones and the positive ones, I don't need to address until one of those slots. But a negative one might need attention. So I let it create a task only if the sentiment is negative. So this last thing I do is create a task in Google Tasks. So think about where you might want to get a notification on something. If a negative email comes in, where would you put it? What would you do with it? For me, I'm just saying create a task in Google Tasks, because that way it shows up on my phone, it shows up in a list, I can check it off when done, things like that. You could do all kinds of things. You can do SMS messaging, you can do connections to CRM. This is where Zapier's power really comes into play. You can come in here and say CRM. So maybe you want a message going to the CRM. Hey, I received a negative email from Greg. Drop it on my account. You decide. This is the beauty of it. So you can decide these things here. Come on, delete. There you go. But in here, we're going to just say, I want to create a task. The title is going to be negative email with the category that AI determined it was. The notes that are going to go into that task are the subject and the body, or a snippet of the body at least, and who it's from, and mark it as due today. So all of this is happening through automated mechanisms and messaging. The email comes in, I don't see it, Zapier sees it, and if it gets a negative sentiment, it creates a task out in Google Tasks for me, which then shows up as an alert on my phone that there's something due today. And I can go, oh, look at that. Negative email from Greg. But it also tells me the category. Doesn't say, notice that my title does not give me more information than simply, hey, there was a negative email, here's the category. You don't want to distract yourself, so you might not want to see all the details of something for the honey-do list or something on a grocery list or a negative email that's not around a business task. So you glance down and you see, oh, I've got a task, a negative email came in about, a business task. Let me see what the details are. And so you can go into that task and check it out. Okay, so that's the basics of what this thing's doing. Let's go back and take a look at why I use ChatGPT versus OpenAI. So ChatGPT, again, is that interface between you and ChatGPT, the app. So it has a lot of conversational things. So let's go back here. The different events that you have in that integration are simply analyzing for sentiment, which we've shown, classifying text, which we've shown. You can also do conversation. This is the standard use of ChatGPT, where you specify back and forth with somebody, with the AI, and that history of the conversation is kept. Normally, when you're doing messaging through OpenAI, you're going to say, hey, I want this email to be generated. You send it, you get a response back. That's it. End of story. ChatGPT is conversational. It retains the history and uses that as context in future messages. So that you can actually build that into Zapier using this conversation event. Very cool thing. Maybe I'll do a video about that. Let me know if you'd like to see it. Extracting structured data, it uses a function calling capability that is within OpenAI that basically allows you to send in unstructured data. Think of PDF content, and then have that content go to some function to know how to extract data out. Consider all of the things like OCR reading of an invoice, right? Your invoice has a certain unstructuredness to it. However, it does have an invoice number, and it's always in the same place. It has various like line items that are in the same kind of box on the screen. That unstructured data can go into OpenAI, and you can pull out those pieces and say, oh, here's the invoice number, here's the due date, and that information can get extracted out. Very cool. Not going to talk about it beyond that here, but definitely something worth checking out. Summarize text and write an email are kind of similar. They're different kind of in their results, but the idea is that behind the scenes, Zapier has a prompt that's all ready to go in it. You're going to fill in the blank. And so basically it's, hey, I'd like to summarize this text. Go here to the action. You put in whatever text you want to have here. This could be the body of an email. It's going to use 3.5 Turbo. Now in this case, I would change this to 4. If you have GPT-4, I would change it to that. When you're dealing with generating real solid content, bigger content based on summarizing and things like that, I find GPT-4 to be head and shoulders above everything else. So just, you can try different things. I would recommend that you do try different things, different models, and see how they react. And maybe I'll do a video on some of the different reactions, and so you can see the difference between these things. But I would use GPT-4, and you can change the temperature and all that. But basically, you're summarizing text. So watch this. If I say, I'm going to take the body of this message, and I just want it to be summarized. If I do continue, down in here, I want you to see what's happening. What's actually being sent from Zapier. It has the tokens, has the model, temperature, the text to summarize, an email that I got from Mark Fulton, guy you've probably seen around here on LinkedIn. And when I test this step, it runs it out through GPT-4. And notice what it did is it created a system message. If you're familiar with how ChatGPT works, there's a system message at the beginning, and then there's user and assistant messages going back and forth as you communicate, as you chat. So this says, please summarize the provided text, and it talks about how to do that. This kind of prompting you can actually use yourself in ChatGPT, so feel free to. There's the text of the email. And here's the summary. Let me move my face out of the way. There's the summary. Greg's AI-generated workflow report is ready. Attached in the email. Feedback welcome. See? It summarized the text. Again, that's something that you might want to do. You might want to have a summary of the email created in your task or texted to you or whatever. Cool things in the ChatGPT world using that integration. Why don't I use the other one? Well, let me show you some of the advantages and disadvantages. So if we go to OpenAI, you get many of the same things. you get classify the text and summarize the text. And you even get the sentiments there. And you even get some additional things like check moderation. So you can see if there's any of these categories of text in the body of the message that you've got, or whatever that thing is that you're analyzing. Notice you can create a transcription or translation that uses Whisper. Whisper's phenomenal, and you're going to want to use the OpenAI integration for that, because ChatGPT, that integration didn't have anything, if you remember. When I was showing it over before, it's really all about conversational, summarization, categorization, whereas this is more wide open. Hey, let's do a translation and transcription. Let's generate an image using DALL-E. You can do API requests and app extensions. This is dealing with the plugins and things that you've seen that are really powerful in ChatGPT. They have that behind the scenes in the API using this. This is pretty advanced stuff. I wouldn't recommend that you tackle it unless you have some good knowledge about how to hit APIs, for example, what APIs are, how they work. Down here is an interesting one. If you know enough about language models, you know about embeddings. An embedding is basically taking your entire document. Let's say it's a document. It could be any amount of text, and summarizing it into a numerical sequence based on certain conditions. So you have these different attributes, like if you're talking about a ball, how big is the ball? Is it round? Is it square? Square ball? Well, you know what I mean. Is it round? Is it spiky? How spiky? How round? How big? How yellow? How blue? All of those attributes help you understand this ball object. And so if you have all of those attributes lined up, you could take a ball anywhere else in the world, run it through the same embeddings, and come up with attributes. And you can compare them, and you can say, this one's just as blue as that one, but that one's spiky and this one's smooth. And so what that does is when you compare them, it gives you a way to compare apples to apples and say, how similar are they? That's how ChatGPT works behind the scenes. That's how it knows this wording that I'm giving back to you is similar to what you were asking. Anyway, you can search embeddings that you might have. So right here, the best matches, this best matches a query string like big animal, attribute, attribute, big, an animal. And it says to a list of document strings like mouse, cat, buffalo, blue whale. So you get the idea. Cat, animal, yes. Blue whale, animal, yes. Big, the big difference there. So you can get similarities to things based on your text. So that whole embeddings thing is tucked into this OpenAI stuff, which is pretty cool. But you have to have those embeddings in place, which is beyond the scope of this conversation. But anyway, doing the same old thing, why couldn't I just do classify text? Same thing, I can put in my stuff that I want classified. I can put in my list of categories. The difference is right here. The model is different. Text DaVinci 003 means nothing if you don't know anything about models, but this is an earlier model before 3.5 Turbo and GPT-4. It's just an earlier model, and the models that you can choose from are all these earlier models. They're not as accurate, they're not as complete, the results aren't as good. They really rock for certain things. But for most things, if you don't know what they really rock means in this case, if you're just looking to classify text, use the ChatGPT integration and use its classification. Use 3.5 or GPT-4 and you will be golden, I promise. It's served me really well. I originally had these all done in regular OpenAI and found the results to be mediocre at best. So that's why you have this. It's like, really, you're going to use the OpenAI one when you have DALL-E, when you have Whisper, or when you know a little bit more about language models and how they work, so you can dive in a little deeper. You can be kind of geeky about it. Totally cool. Use the OpenAI integration. Otherwise, just use the GPT one. Do the standard kind of things you want with generative AI. This thing will serve you really well. So here's a use case for you and why I chose GPT over OpenAI. Hope that serves you well. Let me know what you build. Love to see some of this stuff and see what you guys can come up with. Take care.